everyone, welcome to another Overrated Film Saturday, and today I'm going to be addressing something that's a little controversial, sort of similar when I discussed films like The Hunger Games and Frozen, and this film I find in particular to be a good film, like a lot of the films that I review on when I'm discussing the Overrated Film Saturdays. It's just that I find that there's certain elements that people put the films on a pedestal for, when I really feel that they are either good works or substantially lower quality works compared to some other films. And I would argue that The Lion King is probably that 90s version of Frozen, but again, it's overrated in a completely different way than Frozen is. So I'm sort of going to go into this and explain my thoughts and ideas. More than happy to hear what anybody else has to say in regards to this topic, but I just want to throw out there that I'm not one of those people who thinks The Lion King is a horrible film. Again, I don't think it is, I would consider it to be one of Disney's better works. But again, I don't think it is as good as it was, I think, made out to be when it came out during the time. But for different reasons than Frozen. For Frozen, I felt that the film was of lower quality to the films that came out during this time period. So, in other words, I thought Wreck-It Ralph and Tangled were a lot stronger. The Lion King, I feel, is just as strong as the films that were coming out during the time of the Disney Renaissance, which was during the 90s. But I don't think this film was the big necessarily win for Disney, even though obviously facts prove me wrong on this. I'm arguing based upon my understanding and my thoughts as a viewer on my own, and not looking at the grander scheme of things. And the truth is that The Lion King did make a substantial amount of money. It was the highest grossing film of its time when it came out. Similar to Frozen, how it made a lot of money, like significant portions, compared to a lot of the other films that came out. And I think there are some reasons for this, but I think The Lion King, when you really look at the film as a whole, at least from the way I perceive it, it seems to be on that same par as a lot of the other films that came out during the time. Like, I feel like it's pretty much on par with something like Beauty and the Beast. It might be probably, you could argue, again, it sort of has that sometimes similar tones to Aladdin. It has maybe some kind of like spunk like The Little Mermaid does. So it kind of maintains that same sort of Disney standard film, and good Disney standard film. But for me personally, I don't think it's the best out of all of those films. I think pretty much throughout the 90s, the leveled playing field as far as how good the films were, I think, was pretty much on even kiltered. But it was definitely a lot better than the films that were coming out way back then, before the 90s boom, so to speak, like within the 70s and 80s and such. Obviously way better quality. And I'm not making the argument that Lion King is down here. What I'm arguing is usually people see The Lion King up here, whereas I see it more on the same standard of films that came out during this time period that were produced by Disney and did focus on trying to be, kid friendly. Now, my reasoning behind believing that The Lion King is overrated is also due to the fact that even though it made more money, and even though a lot of people kept going on about this film forever, again, not so much in merchandise, I think, just more people talking about it, like, just reiterating the songs and, all that stuff. It really was the talked about film of that time, sort of similar to how Frozen is really talked about and merchandised. So I think it only makes sense that I would discuss this film as being something that I think was looked up higher than a lot of the other Disney films that came out during this time. Which I don't think is personally fair to the other films, and I think it's not really fair to Lion King, because even though Lion King is unique and it does offer some interesting things, I don't think those things are ultimately somehow better than the other films that were coming out during this time. And again, I enjoy The Lion King. I think it's a really fun film. I just think that there's just this level of Disney-esque quality to it that I think just sort of makes the film somewhat on the same level as the films that were coming out during this time. So, because we see a lot of similar patterns within Lion King that have occurred in other films. The death of a family member being a very significant one. We did see this in Bambi. We do see sort of the main character going off and doing what ultimately he wants. The sort of, don't care attitude, do what you want, kind of Disney philosophy, so to speak. We see that sort of played out too in other Disney films. And even though Lion King does offer some things that are unique, I feel like, again, it goes back to the kind of traditional sort of Disney roots, and in doing so, it remains on that same level, I think, as a lot of the other films. For example, the humor is pretty much sort of, it has that similar tone like Aladdin, and it seems to function with inserting things that have existed before within Disney and putting an interesting spin on them. But in doing so, again, does that make it somehow better? I don't really know. I almost don't think so. For example, when you look at the plot of Lion King, which is about Simba sort of coming back to sort of redeem sort of the what was lost from the Pride Land. You sort of see that in other Disney films where the main character has to put things right and set things right and put things good within motion, and then we have a big climax and all of that stuff. There has to be kind of a change within the character. We see this within Beauty and the Beast too. And again, Lion King does this well. It does this in an interesting way. But again, these are very similar patterns that could be associated with other good Disney films that did come out during this time. And I think that's really why The Lion King was considered one of those films that got the most praise, because it seemed like it was doing something different, because a lot of the films that were coming out during the time, they were all fairy tales. And this one wasn't a fairy tale per se. So when we see something that isn't a fairy tale, we automatically think that, oh, Disney's thinking outside the box. When really they're just taking the good ideas that they had from their other films and incorporating it into this film, which is The Lion King. And I think if you do really watch the film closely, you'll sort of see what I'm talking about. There's really a lot of similar patterns that you see with Lion King that have been put into other films, in particular more children's films. The music's great. There's certain parts, though, of songs where I find them to be okay, and not as good compared to Alan Menken's work. I honestly prefer him than who they got to help out really with. I don't know if it was all Elton John's work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean he helped create some good songs, but I just felt like it felt a little out of place at some points. Like the transitioning, like Simba feels guilty of his dad being hurt, and then somehow we go into Hakuna Matata. It has that really wacky transitioning, kind of like how Bambi sort of does. Um, you know, at least with Bambi, it's not an actual song. It's just kind of like background music and just happy birds twerping. And not a whole full blown song about, yeah, forget about the fact that, something bad, really bad happened in your life. Come with us. It just feels kind of awkward at times with the songs, I feel. Like, just kind of like that whole transitioning of something very tragic happening to something very Hakuna Matata, And even Hakuna Matata, too, isn't really all that of a it's a good song. It's just not one of the ones that really gets me up on my feet and makes me want to think of Disney. Maybe because it's kind of just, it's, again, I'm not really on the same wavelengths when it comes to this film as sort of Doug Walker is. I mean, I think Doug Walker would still put it in the same category that I do, and the fact that it is, I think, a little bit overrated. But only because, again, I think that there are just other songs. Like, I just think Alan Menken wrote better songs for Disney than Elton John put together. It's not to say that Elton John's works are bad. It's just they don't really they're just not as well composed, I think, as something like what Alan Menken did with a lot of the other Disney songs. So again, it's a toss up, but you know what? When I look at the songs, I just feel like they're more standard. And I do remember more of the instrumental work, really, and Hans Zimmerman, Hans Zimmer, excuse me, who they got to do the instrumentals and things like that. He I think did a substantially good job with that. But when you look at really the other songs, they're just kind of, Circle of Life is a good song. Be Prepared is fantastic villain song, but then when you look at all the underbelly and all the other songs, they're just kind of hit and miss for me. And I think some of them have this sort of pretentiousness to them, like, the Can You Feel the Love Tonight? I like the song. I definitely prefer Elton John's version. And when I hear some pop people singing the song, it gets a little distracting, especially considering the fact that beforehand Disney always had, their characters actually singing the songs. Unless it would, I mean, I understand why they would do it in this case, because Lion singing is kind of goofy. Even with the I Just Can't Wait to Be King, it's still kind of goofy. But I think you still could have done it, and it would have probably been fine. But again, I just think choosing these pop stars or just this poppy voice, I just don't think that really gives the song a lot of weight. If they just had Elton John singing, it would have been probably, I think, better. But yeah, I think there's just some song choices that they made that were just a little bit more, I think, made it a little bit more of a disadvantage than an advantage, as opposed to, again, the other Disney films that came out during the time that used Alan Menken for a lot of it. Now, again, like I mentioned in regards to the plot, there are similar things that end up happening in a lot of other Disney films. It's not to say that Lion King it takes it and does it in a good way. It's just, I don't think it does it in a very, it doesn't do it in a way that I think makes it stand out, like, substantially. It's a good story. It's a good it's a good plot. It has a lot of interesting ideas. It's just that the way that it approaches it, I think, is pretty much on the same level as a lot of other Disney films and a lot of other concepts that Disney has brought up. Um, you know, and that's what I mean by the fact that, it's Disney was putting out good films, but they're all good in their own respects. Not one film is, I think, superior, really. They just all do different things. And I think Lion King did something different, but again, as far as the level of quality is concerned, I think it maintains that standard level of good 90s Disney and is not on some higher end, you know, um, pedestal compared to a lot of other Disney products that were coming out during this time period. But I think a lot of what made it stand out, sort of like, how Frozen had its thing that kind of stood out, was the fact that this wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't um, a boy meets girl scenario. It it wasn't primarily focused on magic or or it just wasn't focused on what we would consider traditionally Disney. And I think that's why a lot of people got behind this film and thought that it was bringing something new to the table, when really I think it was bringing in the ideas that a lot of other Disney films had during the time. It's just it wasn't doing it in the form of a fairy tale. It was doing it in the form of taking in all of these different concepts and putting them in together, like putting in Hamlet, putting in this and that. So when you look at it from that perspective, that's why I think it's overrated. I think it got praise for things that were disguised as to be something different, when I really feel like that it pretty much stays on that kind of standard level, as films like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Little Mermaid. I think it just, again, it disguised itself um, as the superior product. Even though I think it pretty much maintains that same level of storytelling, of character, and all that stuff. Same level, compared to the other Disney films. But again, I think that's sort of why, it disguised itself as being something better, because, ooh, this is the one that's not a fairy tale. Sort of similar with Frozen, how, ooh, this is a fairy tale, but it's about sisterly love, so therefore we're better. And again, I think Lion King plays with that kind of similar concept. So you could say they're overrated in that sense, similarly. It ups itself up because it isn't a fairy tale. Frozen ups itself because it's a bond between two sisters, even though that doesn't provide any substance to the film. It just says, yeah, this is what our story is. It doesn't say anything about how the characters are developed. It doesn't say anything about, really the story. And again, it's pretty much Lion King maintains that standard level, I think. When you look at all the other Disney films that have come out, it pretty much maintains that standard level. And I would say that I do honestly prefer Snow White or Fantasia or Pinocchio. I think those films actually had something unique to work from, and were a lot more based around creating emotion and doing things in sort of a unique way. Whereas I think Lion King, it just sort of has the same standard for me when I look at all the other films that were coming out during that time. And I think that's why I consider it to be overrated. I mean, I think the story is as good as a lot of the other stories from Disney during the time. I think the music pretty much stays standard, maybe a little bit lower than some of the other Disney films that came out during the time. The characters are pretty standard too. you know, of other Disney films that come out during the time. It's just, again, we focus more maybe on kids than we do adults initially, or somewhere in between, so that's maybe something that the film can say is unique, but really the characters sort of have these similar characteristics and things like that, but they're good characters. It's just, again, it's that same kind of level of standard. So yeah, and again, I think that's really what it comes down to when it comes to my opinion on this. I mean, I think Lion King's great. I think it has a lot of interesting things to say. I think there's certain parts of it that are unique, but I think overall, when you look at The Lion King and you look at the other films that were coming out during this time, I think you would probably see that, it pretty much stays on that same level, at least in my opinion. I don't think it ups the bar for Disney. I think it just maintains that good quality. It doesn't exceed the quality, I think. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.